one of the aspects of the story of the Orlando tragedy that has not received perhaps quite as much attention as it should is the fact that it has come to light, or come to the public's attention, I should say, as a result of the tragedy and as a result of the call for blood for the victims of the tragedy, that sexually active gay men are not allowed to give blood. And here to talk about that with us now is Jessica Firger, who is a health reporter for Newsweek and has recently written about that. Jessica, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you.
So what's the deal? Men who have had sex with other men in the last year can't give blood. Is that right?
That's correct. So this ban, which was instated in the 1980s at the height of the AIDS crisis, it is a ban on gay men and men who have sex with men who that they are not permitted to be blood donors. And for a very long time, this was a blanket ban, and then at the end of 2015, the FDA turned it into a partial ban where a potential donor is not permitted to give blood unless he has abstained from sex for 12 months. And many activists and lawmakers call this a de facto ban because it's, most men who are gay, a lot of them will not remain abstinent for that long. And also because it's, it can be very hard to, to get information about sexual activity, really, in
of course,
out of pretty much anybody.
Well, I would contend that most people, period, regardless of sexual orientation, are unlikely, are unlikely to abstain for that long. So it is a de facto ban. I'm not sure the medical logic behind that 12-month ban, but then I assume the original medical logic behind this, if it can be called logic, I assume the original reasoning behind it it goes back to the 1980s, right?
Yeah, at that time when the ban was made, there was some scientific evidence that that having gay men and men who have sex with men give blood could potentially cause problems in the nation's blood supply. One of the things, there's been a couple of scientific advancements that makes many people believe that it's perfectly reasonable from a public health standpoint to change it. And one of them is that at the time of the AIDS crisis, when these guidelines were first made, the only test that we had available to detect HIV and AIDS was the antibody test. And the problem with that is that there was a 3-month window of time where if someone was exposed to the virus and was positive, the antibodies wouldn't show up on the test for 3 months, which obviously is a pretty big window of opportunity where somebody who is HIV positive could become a donor, and that would be problematic. But since then, scientists have been able to create a test that can detect the virus in as early as 11 days after exposure. So that's really a game changer. And the other advancement in technology is technology that's able to clean the blood supply from donors, not only of the HIV virus, but really pretty much any virus such as Zika and dengue fever and bacteria and other pathogens that might get into blood.
Well, Jessica Firger, those of us who were around in the 1980s and are paying the price for it now, but one of the things that people may not really realize is the level of hysteria that there was about the AIDS virus. Very little was known. It was, there were social mores involved. There was a great deal of fear. And so the notion, I think a lot of people might just be historically resistant to the idea that it could even be cleaned out because there was fear that if you touched something that had been touched at any point by an HIV positive person, we had a lot of educating to do. But it sounds from what you're saying as if, there may have, whatever justification there had been for this donation ban has been overturned by at least 2 scientific breakthroughs: the ability to clean the blood, the ability to detect in a reasonably short period of time the presence of the virus. So it sounds like there's no valid scientific reason for this de facto ban at all. Do you think that's true?
I think that on some level it's true. A lot of countries have come around to completely lifting bans. France, not long ago, they completely lifted their ban on, men who have sex with men becoming donors, and they had a full ban like the U.S. for quite some time, and many countries are following with this. So a lot of people, a lot of activists in the U.S., they believe it's high time for that to happen. And the other thing is that from a public health standpoint, there's been a bunch of research that looks at alternatives to simply banning a certain group of people. And one of them is looking at using an individual risk assessment where you're asking not just, a question like, are you someone who has, are you a man who has sexual relations with other men, but asking everybody about their sexual activity and practices and whether or not they have unprotected sex with multiple partners. So, and I personally think from a public health standpoint that should be what's happening. We should start with all potential donors on the same level of ground. I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
Oh, I think it's very reasonable, and you're a health reporter, but it seems to me would also be reasonable if you do an individual risk assessment of that kind, to ask not just questions relating to sexual practice, but, for example, are you a user of needles, of intravenous drug user, right?
That's true. And one paradox that people point out is that currently the FDA's guidelines, you have to, if you're a man who has sex with a commercial sex worker, a prostitute, you only have to wait a year. And there's, and the same goes for women who possibly have sex with, or who say they've had sex with an HIV positive partner. So there's a lot of conflicting guidelines that really don't make sense. And, just a lot of activists see it as bigoted and discriminatory, as well as many lawmakers at this point.
Well, so last question, I guess, for you. You mentioned lawmakers. Are there any initiatives underway or being discussed in terms of changing the law? I mean, I assume this is more or less regulatory rather than legal, these prescriptions and bans. Are there any legal solutions? Are people talking about regulatory changes?
Several members of Congress, they sent a letter to the FDA commissioner requesting that the ban be completely lifted. And, many have tried to make this change in the past, which has led to lifting the ban partially. But I think we're gonna continue to see this story in the news, and I think we're gonna see developments in it, but I don't know what they will be. And just from my experience of reporting on the FDA, I think whatever happens is going to take a while.
Oh, that's understandable. And we know you don't know what will be. We know you're a reporter and not a fortune teller. But Jessica Firger of Newsweek, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
And we will be right back after this. I am Richard R.J. Eskow, sitting in for Thom Hartmann. Your calls and more when we return.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.